Dear ICLaVE participants, good morning. Welcome to the second invited lecture of this conference. We hope all of you are having a good time in Málaga and enjoying the different panels and paper sessions presented here. Now, we have a new opportunity to enjoy by learning about the rising of interdialectal forms in Canarian Spanish, the historical importance of the Canary Islands in the relationship between the Spanish-speaking American countries and the peninsular Spain makes Canarian Spanish one of our most interesting varieties. I'm very pleased to introduce Manuel Almeida Suarez. Manuel Almeida has devoted himself to the study of Canarian Spanish during all his academic life. Not only from a dialectological perspective, but also applying sociolinguistic methods and variationist theories. His research covers all linguistic levels: acoustic phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and even pragmatics. Therefore, we can say that he is one of the best specialists in Canarian Spanish, but we can also say that due to the accuracy of his analysis and his intelligent use of linguistic theory, he is one of our best sociolinguistic experts. Apart from that, he is a good friend, a trustworthy colleague, and an accessible professor whose curiosity and eagerness to adopt brand new methodological and theoretical framework has encouraged a lot of us to carry out sociolinguistic research. We are grateful for his presence among us today. Be prepared to enjoy. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Manuel Almeida Suarez.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. I'd like to start by saying thanks to my dear colleague, Matilde Vida, for her kind presentation. I'd also like to say thanks to the organizers of this conference, especially to Professor Villena for inviting me to hold this session. The subject I'm going to deal with is a subject that, with few sessions, has been treated in a very peripheral way in dialectal studies, interdialectalisms. Here is the structure of my talk. I'll describe the concept of, in a general way, of hybridism and interdialectalism, and comment the most important hypothesis that has been proposed about the origin of these forms. And I'll propose my own hypothesis of the origin of these forms in Canarian Spanish. I think that in order to a better understanding of the arising, the emergence of these forms in a society, in a community, we should take into account different aspects related to the origin and evolution of the culture and society of those communities. I describe the methodological aspects, the more general aspects of the methodology applied in this research, speech samples, kind of variables under analysis, and why those variables have been chosen, etc. The results we allow to accept or reject the starting hypothesis. And finally, I'll conclude with the most remarkable aspects of my talk. The development of hybrid linguistic forms constructed from elements of two or more systems is a relative frequent phenomenon or process among world languages. In fact, it's likely that most known languages have had a hybrid origin. In the case of dialect contact, one of the most interesting outcomes of the contact is the emergence of interdialectal forms. That is, forms, structures constructed with features or structures from established dialects. According to Berrutto, there are different aspects that make interesting from a theoretical point of view the study or the analysis of these forms. First, they are a consequence of dialect contact. They are not present in the established dialects, but are a consequence of contact. Second, they imply a certain fusion between two grammars. And third, in this case, in the origin of interdialectal forms, dialects and standard varieties are present simultaneously in discourse. Different theories have been proposed up to now about the origin of these forms. The first one was proposed by Chambers and Trudgill in 1980. Chambers and Trudgill described the British dialect in East Anglia and West Midlands, and observed a very interesting distribution of variants of the variable U. Northern dialects use this variant that Matilde is marking, and southern dialects use preferentially this variant. Among those dialects, there is a transition area where two very interesting solutions have been adopted. What Chambers and Trudgill call mixed dialects, where speakers use northern and southern variants in a simultaneous way, and what they call fudge dialects, where speakers has created a new form. This one. This new variant shared with the southern variant the fact that both are back and rounded, and shares with the northern variant the height is closer with respect to openness, is closer to the northern variant than to the southern variant. According to Chambers and Trudgill, this new variant allows individuals to play simultaneously, to place at the same time on both poles of the phonetic continuum represented those poles, both the northern and the southern variants. But they continue, it could be understood as a way of avoiding to identify themselves with the most marked variant represented by the northern and the southern variants. That is, they make two apparently contradictory statements, but they finally discarded the first one and opted for the second one. According to them, interdialectal forms are a way of expressing neutrality in discourse. However, 6 years later, Peter Tragil, in his book Dialect in Contact, defends a different position. According to Tragil, interdialectal forms are a consequence of the imperfect learning of a second dialect. That is, during the learning of a second dialect, during the process of learning the second dialect, some failure appears during the learning process. Tragil doesn't explain he doesn't identify which is the cause of this failure, that avoid that individuals perfectly match the forms they are trying to imitate. This way, a new form having characteristics of the vernacular form and the form they are trying to imitate is created. Tragil, who explains the changes that take place in British dialects according to the ideas of the communicative accommodation theory, describes interdialectal forms as manifestations of imperfect or incomplete accommodation. He also relates the concept of interdialectalism with the concept of interlanguage by Selinker, because the same process that take place in the dialect contact occur when language come into contact. We could add a third hypothesis. The hypothesis that Chambers and Tragil defended, but they finally discard. That is, individuals, speakers, can use interdialectal forms as a way of expressing a dual cultural identity. That is, in this case, it couldn't be a case of denial, but a case of affirmation. So individuals could create interdialectal forms as a way of expressing feelings of identification with the cultures related to the two dialects involved in the process of hybridization. This is an idea that we can observe. This is an idea that has been used, that has been applied for different authors. For instance, Peter Muskin, when studying the origins of media lengua, a lingua created in central Ecuador by the Quechua population, a language that has been created with features on elements from Quechua and Spanish, states that media lengua could be a way of expressing feelings of identification with the rural, traditional Quechua culture, but at the same time with the modern, urban Spanish culture. The aim of my talk is trying to verify or to demonstrate the explanatory capacity of these three hypotheses with respect to two interdialectal forms that have arisen in Canarian Spanish. The first one affects the palatal plosive consonant che in words as coche, car, ancho, wide. In standard Spanish, in Canarian Spanish, there is a plosive palatal consonant, normally voice. The corresponding sound in standard Spanish is an affricate consonant with a two sections, perfectly identified, a plosive section and a fricative section, both are unvoiced. As a result of the contact between Standard Spanish and Canarian Spanish, a new variant has emerged in the Canarian archipelago. A variant that consisted of preserving the characteristics of the plosive sound. Individuals have added a fricative section. We'll see later some sonograms about this sound. The second hybrid form affects the glottal traditional consonant. In Canarian Spanish, we have a fricative glottal consonant in words as gente, people, naranja, orange. The corresponding sound in Standard Spanish is an unvoiced velar fricative sound. In a spectrogram, in a sonogram, this sound is represented by transverse bands of friction. A new variant has arisen in Canarian Spanish that consists of reinforcing the fricative character, because in Canarian Spanish, although the glottal consonant is fricative, however, is very weak, so it's very hard. We hardly observe fricative marks in a sonogram. It's very weak. It seems that the process of hybridization consists on reinforcing the fricative aspect of the consonant. My hypothesis is that the hybrid variant of the palatal sound can be due to an imperfect hellenic of a second dialect, whereas the hybrid form of the glottal sound can be interpreted as a voluntary choice of individuals in order to express a dual cultural identity. That is, the new variant could allow people to express feeling of identification with the Canarian culture, but at the same time with the values associated to the standard Spanish with respect to aspects as prestige, status, cosmopolitanism, etc. I support this idea with respect to the palatal consonant. According to the information provided by different authors, it seems that there is a greater phonetic distance between the vernacular sound and the standard one. So, if people having in his ideolect the palatal plosive wants to imitate the standard Spanish, he or she has to control a lot of aspects, and some aspects are very difficult to match, as we'll see later. However, for a person in Canarian Spanish, it would be very easy to pronounce the vernacular, the fricative standard sound. In order to have a better understanding of the arising of these hybrid forms, I refer to some aspects related to the formation of the current culture and society in Canarian Spanish. Here is the place of the Canarian Canary Islands in the international context, and here are the Canary Islands in the regional context. The Canary Islands represent a typical case of hybrid society. Before the conquest by the Castilian crown in the 15th century. The islands were populated by groups of individuals from North Africa and who lived in a Neolithic culture. Those groups have different social, economic, and legal have different social, economic, and legal structures. After the conquest, the Castilian crown undertook the repopulation of the territory, not an easy task because at the same time there was also the repopulation of other territories under its domination, as the Kingdom of Granada and the territories in the New World. That would display the diversity of origins of the first settlers. Among the most important groups, the were Andalusians. When I say Andalusians, I mean Western Andalusians. Extremadurans, Castilian, Portuguese, Genoese, Moors, and Sub-Saharans. And among the less important groups, there are the Basques, Galicians, Catalans, French, and English. The most important groups in the formation of the Canarian dialect were Andalusians and Castilians. We can say that the current Canarian dialect has a Castilian base and a Western Andalusian shape. Castilians provided the lexical and the morphosyntactic structure of the dialect. Western Andalusians provided the phonetic level. The influence of Western Andalusia, the so-called Sevillian norm, continued during the following centuries because, as you can see, the ships leaving the ports of Cadiz and Seville and traveling to America had to go to the new continent through the Canary Islands. That allowed different contacts between people from the Latin American, Spanish, and the Canary Islands, especially from the Caribbean area. Taking into account similar processes that have happened in modern societies, we can suppose that a koine was formed. However, if that koine took place, it wouldn't have been necessarily imperfect, because there is a factor that would have promoted homogenization, the small dimension of the territory. However, the Canary Islands constitute a discontinuous territory, but that would have delayed the homogenization process and reinforced diversity. There is another aspect that would have contributed to the divergence in the islands. Most of the islands have an abrupt orography. So, being a territory made up of islands and the orographic conditions of most of them have strengthened the separation or have avoided meeting between the different groups in the archipelago. At this respect, it's interesting to mention a testimony by an English traveler quoted by Cristóbal Corrales and Dolores Corbella. This English traveler in the 19th century was amazed about the great diversity he had observed in the Canary Islands, not only among islands, but also inside each island. The diversity we can observe nowadays, not only in language, we can observe nowadays a great difference or important difference between the islands, among the islands, with respect to different aspects of culture, alimentary habits, popular traditions, and language. The diversity we observe in the level of language has led most dialectologists to refuse to consider the status of dialect to the Canarian spoken in the archipelago. Instead, they say that what there exists in the Canarian Spanish is a set of speeches, not a real dialect. If we take into account the evolution of the language during the 5 or 6 decades, we can come to different conclusions. First, there is a great vitality of traditional forms in all the islands, in rural and in urban areas. However, some changes, similar to the ones that have been described for other dialects, for other European dialects, have emerged. Horizontal convergence or leveling between different local norms and a standardization of the dialect. As a consequence of those movements in the level of the language, interdialectal forms have emerged. The change that have taken place in the level of the language can be related to different changes that have happened in the culture, society, economy in the Canary Islands. The most important transformation that has happened in the archipelago, in the cultural life during the 5, 6 decades has been the emergence of mass tourism. We can add the emergence of mass tourism made that many individuals living in the countryside abandoned agriculture, the most important economic activity since the time of the conquest, and moving to the new areas oriented towards the new activity, tourism. There have been a development of instructors that allowed individuals from different communities to come together. The increase in the population educational level sometimes related to the new demands for the new jobs that emerged related to tourism would this circumstance promote at the same time the social rising of many individuals from working class. During the last 2 decades, we have observed in the Canary Islands an increment of the standard and hybrid forms, especially in public contexts, talking on the radio, on television, public debates, presentations, academic debates, etc. So I decided that in order to a better study of the hybridization processes, I should to analyze some speech samples from public context. I chose to select radio programs. Only radio stations broadcasting regionally were taken into account. The recordings were made between 2006 and 2010, and the sample and the number of hours of the sample is 20. 2 kinds of analysis were carried out. an acoustic analysis of 15 individuals and variation in age informants. The selection I selected the informants who talked longer because the two variables I'm going to analyze are among the less frequent phonemes in Spanish, according to Alarcos Lloras. The first aspect, acoustic analysis, would allow to verify which kind of differences exist between the vernacular sounds and the hybrid forms, and compare both with the characteristics of the standard sound. Now, I think that we have described in more detail the different characteristics of the sounds I'm going to analyze. In Canarian Spanish, vernacular che is mid or postpalatal. In standard Spanish is prepalatal. Canarian che, in the Canarian che, the surface of contact between the tongue and the palate is larger than in Canarian Spanish. Both, as I couldn't analyze both aspects because I would have need a palatograph. With respect to voicing, the vernacular sound can be voiced or unvoiced, preferentially voiced, whereas the standard Spanish sound is unvoiced. And now we are looking at the two most important differences between the vernacular and the standard sound according to Alarcos and Quilis. In Canarian Spanish, the plosive sound consists on a plosive phase. Yes. If we analyze acoustically some variants, we can observe a narrow band of formants, but that's a narrow band of frication, but that band of frication is very short in time and very weak in intensity. According to standard Spanish, it's a perfect affricate sound. According to Quilis, in order for a plosive sound to be heard as an affricate, the frication phase should last at least 50 milliseconds. This is a condition that none of the vernacular sound reaches. So, even there is a fricative phase, the sound is heard as a plosive. Here there is only a few examples, but there are a lot of analysis because this is a phenomenon very well analyzed in Canadian Spanish by different authors. But there is also a very important, unrelated with the previous one. According to Gili and Navarro Tomás, in Spanish, there is a great variety of che variants. There is a great individual variation, but they state that the closer the sound to the standard, the closer the proportion of the duration of the plosive phase with respect to the fricative phase to 25 to 30. That is, if the fricative section lasts 100 milliseconds, the plosive section in the most standard sounds should last 125 to 130. This is a condition that none of the vernacular sound reaches because as Alvar and Quilis have demonstrated or have remarked in Canarian Spanish, when the fricative section is present, the plosive phase is much more longer than the fricative one. For instance, in Morrojable, in Fuerteventura, 62 milliseconds, the duration of the plosive phase, and the fricative section 32, that means that the plosive phase is 200 longer than the fricative section, much more longer. Since the late 50s, a new variant has been described in Canarian Spanish. This variant has different names have been given to the new variant: palatal, strident, intense. In a study I carried out in Santa Cruz de Tenerife, I observed that the new variants have consisted on reinforcing the fricative section. You can see here that both in stressed and unstressed position, the innovative variant, in both cases, the fricative position is longer than 50 milliseconds. Thus, that in both cases, the new consonant can be heard as a fricate. However, the duration of the plosive phase remains with the same values than the 54 and 70, similar to the ones of the vernacular sound. That is, that the new variant has reinforced the fricative section, but the plosive section remains as in the vernacular one. Here there is a sonogram of the lax, the vernacular sound. Can you show here? The plosive phase is voice. There is a low voicing bar, and the fricative section is very short. It doesn't reach 50 milliseconds. The hybrid form, there is a very weak voicing bar, and the frication band is longer. And here there is the Spanish standard sound with the two sections, the plosive phase and voice, and the fricative section longer, two cases by Alvar. With respect to the glottal consonants, the difference between the vernacular and the standard, here are the difference between both sounds. The vernacular is glottal, the standard velar, both of them are continuous. The vernacular sound can be voiced or unvoiced, but preferably voiced. The standard is unvoiced, and the vernacular sound, they usually doesn't show any frication marks, and if they are present, they are very weak. The characteristic of the standard sound is a clear transverse band of formants. We can say that the characteristics of the vernacular sound are similar to the approximant consonants. Other variants of the glottal phoneme, the relaxed and the letter E, new variant have emerged. In this case, the new variant, the hybrid forms of the glottal sound hasn't been so studied because it isn't as frequent in informal styles as the plosive one. Here you can see here an example of the vernacular sound in the word junio, June, and julio, July. There is a very short one. And you can see that when we go approaching to the standard sound, the transverse band of friction are more and more frequent. Here there is a hybrid form in the word la gente. Here, new variants in the upper part. And here is a standard sound pronounced by Canarian Spanish. I didn't show any sonogram of palatal of the standard sound pronounced by Canarian people because it's very hard. We barely hear a standard sound in the Canarian Spanish, but we can hear standard or near standard sounds of the glottal consonant. And here is the typical characteristic of the standard sound pronounced by a speaker of the Castilian, the Castilian norm or the standard Spanish. The acoustic analysis, here are the characteristics of the number of instances I analyzed through speech analyzer. The phonetic characteristics I study are the ones I previously observed. There is a difference, but here in the case of Che, I analyze the length of frication bands because I observe that the longer in frequency of the frication band, the more hybrid the consonant, closer to the standard the sound was. For the individual variation, I analyze 8 individuals. In this case, there are the number of instances I analyze. Here are the results. I try to demonstrate the place of hybrid forms with respect to the vernacular and to the standard one. With respect to voicing, we can see that the percentage of unvoicing is similar in the hybrid variant, they are in red, to the vernacular one. The values of the standard, the characteristics of the standard sound, the Castilian sound, have been taken from Quilis. With respect to the presence of frication marks, 90% of the vernacular sound have friction bands, but in the hybrid forms, all the hybrid forms have friction marks. Don't forget, it's very high, the presence of frication marks, but don't forget that we are analyzing public speech, and in public speech, people stylize the discourse in a different way than when talking in more informal styles. That if we compare the characteristics of the vernacular in public speech than in more informal speech, it's also different. That is, the concept of vernacular is a gradient concept. Most of these concepts are gradients. With respect to the frication length, the hybrid form is closer to the standard one. I'm not going to take into account the duration of closure because in itself it's not important, but in any case, the duration of closure is similar in hybrid and in vernacular sound. And here is the most important. With respect to the duration of frication, in stressed syllables, a hybrid form is similar to the standard, but than to the vernacular. This is the duration. In stressed syllable, the hybrid form sounds as an affricate, unlike the vernacular. And in a stress position, the hybrid form is similar to the vernacular. So hybrid forms are unstable. With respect to the 25 to 30% of the increment of the closure of the time closure with respect to the fricative one, neither sound, hybrid, and vernacular, or both of them behave in the same place. Neither reach this percentage. We can observe this with respect to the. So we can see that approximately half of the aspects, half of the characteristics of the hybrid form allow to put it together with the standard, or closer to the standard, and half of them closer to the vernacular one. So the initial hypothesis that I thought that the characteristics of the hybrid form would be closer to the ones of the vernacular than to the ones of the standard wasn't perfectly accomplished. With respect to the acoustic characteristics of the glottal consonant, here you can see there is a column with standard variants. Standard variants pronounced by Canarian speakers, but now I'm not interested in that variant, but I'm focusing my analysis on hybrid forms and the relation that the hybrid forms have with the vernacular and with the Castilian standard. With respect to voicing, most of the hybrid forms are unvoiced, and most of the vernacular forms are voiced. There is a great difference. So in this case, the hybrid form is closer to the standard. With respect to the presence of frication mark, the hybrid form is closer to the standard. And with respect to the presence of transverse frication marks, the hybrid form is closer to the standard. But don't forget that this percentage, 79.5, is a percent with respect to the 35%. That is a low. There are a few cases of vernacular sounds having a transverse fang. With respect to the total duration, the hybrid form is keep an equidistance between the vernacular and the standard. So, with respect to the results, I know that there are just a few features I'm analyzing, but we could say that in this case the hybrid variants are a bit closer to the standard variant than to the vernacular one. With respect to the individual variation, the vernacular form is the most frequent among the different variants of the sound. I said that vernacular and traditional forms have a great vitality in Canarian Spanish. You can see that there are also hybrid forms, and just in one case, a politician, curiously a nationalist politician, have pronounced two sounds similar that I had as if they were standard. But in any other, in the remaining cases, none of the informants pronounced a standard variant. What happened with the individual variation of the glottal? That we can hear vernacular sounds, the most frequent, hybrid sound, and standard sounds. So I think that it could demonstrate that for a Canarian person, it's easier to pronounce a standard sound that that in the case of the palatal. So if individuals can pronounce the standard sound and they prefer to pronounce a hybrid form, why? Maybe because they want to express a dual identity. But we can add another explanation. It may happen that during the process of standardization, individuals don't want to make this process abruptly, but transitionally. That is, they don't go from a vernacular to a standard directly, but through a stage, but having previously a phase of hybridism. It can be an interpretation we can add. According to the different analysis that has been carried out in multilingual communities, in order for accept this interpretation of the dual identity, individuals need to have positive attitudes to the two dialects involved in the hybridization or the hybridizing process. No such analysis has been carried out in this case, but we have at our disposal a very interesting analysis by Laura Morgenthaler-Garcia, now in the University of Bremen. She carried out an analysis about attitudes in the Canary Islands, and she observed that people in the Canary Islands have two main types of attitudes to their own variety and to standard variety. With respect to what they call interpersonal attractiveness, she observed that Canarian speakers was considered as sweet, soft, close, and not aggressive with respect to the standard one. However, the standard was considered insulting, aggressive, and distant. But with respect with the second type of attitudes, the social prestige, she observed that Canarian Spanish was valued as incorrect and rough, whereas standard Spanish was considered correct, fine, and adequate. In Lavovian terms, we could say that Canarian Spanish have coveted prestige and standard Spanish over prestige. Conclusions. Usually, hybridization process takes place in hybrid societies. I think the static hypothesis has been corroborated. I think that individual variation has corroborated in more clear way the initial hypothesis that the analysis of the different features analyzed. This, by talk, I think that has given an answer to a question I said at the beginning, but the number of questions that opens are much more. For instance, according to Garcia Canclini, hybrid behavior could support the postmodern theories that defend the idea that in modern societies we can't defend the old concept of identity represented by the rational science. So we should investigate this aspect, I think. We should analyze linguistic variation as any other sociolinguistic variables. analyze what happens with other social groups. For instance, people when people call to the radio, to the television programs. We should also analyze the social meaning of the hybrid forms. People can express hybridism in two ways. Using alternatively vernacular and standard variants, and using hybrid forms. Have both solutions the same meanings or are different? This is the question of the mixed and foyer dialects. Thank you.